I'm Sarah Taylor, and let me tell you a story. My story. Not the kind you read about in glossy magazines or watch unfold in polished courtroom dramas. No, this is quieter, colder. The kind of story that starts with a whispered betrayal and ends with a woman walking away, not in defeat, but in full control. For most of my life, I believed in the people around me. I believed in love, in marriage, in the soft-spoken loyalty of family. I believed that blood meant something, and that grief had the power to bring people closer. But grief doesn't heal. It exposes. It strips away the performance, the polite nods, the tender smiles, and it shows you who people really are when there's money on the table and legacy in the air. When my father died, I thought the world had gone silent. I thought I'd have time to mourn. I was wrong. What came next wasn't mourning. It was maneuvering. My husband, my mother-in-law, the people I had let into my life, into my heart, turned overnight into strategists, opportunists, predators. And I became something else entirely. Not broken, not bitter, prepared. So if you're listening, really listening, know this. This isn't just about inheritance. It's about recognition, clarity, and choosing not to be devoured by people who smile when they steal from you. This is my story, and it begins with a funeral. I thought losing my father would break me. I was wrong. It only revealed who was really waiting to strike. I stood beneath the oak tree my father had planted when I was born, its leaves brittle and brown like the silence that wrapped around the mourners. The air was dry that morning in Seattle, almost resentfully so, as if nature itself refused to mourn him. I clutched the program in my hands, the cover printed with his name in gold serif, William Taylor 19482023. Just beneath it, the words, "Beloved father, visionary, founder of Taylor West Holding." I hated that line. It felt sterile, distant, as if his legacy could be summed up in a tagline. People whispered as they passed by. Some offered stiff condolences, others just nodded, unsure how to address the only daughter who now stood as the last of her bloodline. My husband, Gregory, stood at my side with one hand lightly grazing the small of my back. It was performative, like everything else he'd done lately. He hadn't cried, not once. And I'd noticed. Evelyn, his mother, arrived 40 minutes late, an entrance as cold and calculated as the woman herself. She wore a black silk gown and oversized sunglasses that didn't leave her face even once. No words, no flowers. She nodded at me as if we were strangers sharing an elevator. She left before the service ended. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the house in a haze, stepping into the study where my father and I used to read together. I sat in his chair, leather now cracked and faintly smelling of his cologne. The silence was unbearable. The books on the shelf didn't offer comfort, only memory. At 9:12 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't expected to see so soon. Philip Anderson. My father's attorney. He asked to meet. Nothing urgent, he said, but best done in person. I agreed, thinking it might be about the will, maybe some logistics regarding the company's shares or property management. Nothing life-changing. Nothing I couldn't emotionally handle. The meeting was held at Anderson and Miles LLP in a building downtown, the kind of sleek office where the carpet absorbed every footstep and the receptionist looked like she belonged on the cover of a tech magazine. I walked in, still wearing black, still carrying the weight of his absence like an invisible shawl. Philip greeted me with a kind smile and a soft handshake, then closed the door behind us. "Sarah," he said gently, "your father was a meticulous man. He prepared extensively for this. Everything is very clear." He opened a leather folder and slid it toward me. "After taxes and legal disbursements, the value of your inheritance stands at just over $35 million. My fingers hovered over the document, but I didn't touch it. I stared at the number, my chest hollowing. 35 million. It felt surreal, obscene, like a prize I never wanted to win, like an apology written in dollar signs. I left the firm in a daze, the city blurting past me without color. Gregory was already home when I arrived, his car parked, his jacket draped over the arm of the couch like it belonged more than I did. He glanced down at the papers I laid out on the coffee table. A low whistle escaped his lips. "So it's true," he said, lowering himself beside me. "It's really all yours." I nodded slowly. "I didn't know it would be this much." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, we should probably talk about what to do with it." I blinked. "Do with it? Yeah. Invest. Buy that place in Aspen you liked. And of course," he added, almost casually, "we need to figure out how much to give to Mom." I turned to look at him. "Excuse me?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "My mom. Evelyn. She's family. Half seems fair." That word, half, felt like a blade between my ribs. I stared at him, unblinking. "This is my father's legacy," I said, voice low. "Why would we give half to your mother?" He tilted his head like I was the one being irrational. "Because she raised me. She's been through a lot. You know that?" I didn't reply. But in that moment, something shifted. The man I married, the man who once cried when my father toasted us at our wedding, was gone. And in his place sat someone who looked at me not as a partner in grief, but as a bank account. Gregory didn't press the matter that night, but I could feel the shift in the air between us, like a room where someone had opened a window just enough to let the cold in. He poured himself a scotch and turned on the news, as if we hadn't just had a conversation about handing over millions of dollars to the woman who couldn't even stay through my father's funeral. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours after that. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "People will show you who they are the moment they believe you can't say no." He always saw straight through masks. Mine, his colleagues, even Evelyn. He'd never trusted her, though he was too dignified to ever say it aloud. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. It was an unknown number. Against better judgment, I answered. "Lauren, sweetheart," came the syrupy voice I hadn't heard since the funeral. "Evelyn." She didn't wait for me to respond. "Gregory told me the wonderful news. I'm so proud of you. Your father was such a smart man." I remained silent. My grip tightened on the phone. "I know this might feel a little awkward," she continued, "but since you're coming into all that money, I thought we could sit down and talk numbers. I have some exciting ideas. Real estate, maybe a new place for myself. Nothing extravagant, of course, just something tasteful." I exhaled slowly. "Evelyn," I said, calm but firm, "I lost my father less than a week ago, and you're calling me to talk about numbers?" A beat of silence. Then a sharp click of her tongue. "He would want you to take care of family. That's what good daughters and good wives do." I stared at the ceiling, letting the words settle before replying. "With all due respect, Evelyn, you are not my family. You are Gregory's family. And my father left this to me, not to us, not to you." The mask dropped instantly. Her voice turned cold. "You've always thought you were too good for us. Let's see how long you last when you're all alone, sweetheart." She hung up. I sat in bed, the phone still to my ear, but I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. What I felt was something deeper, something harder. Resolve. By dinner, Gregory had heard about the call. He stormed into the kitchen where I was heating leftovers. "You had no right to speak to my mother like that," he snapped. "She had no right to ask for my father's money," I replied, placing the plate in front of him without flinching. "She's my only family," he said, his tone rising, "and I won't let you treat her like garbage just because you think you're suddenly above us." I turned, looked him square in the eye. "This isn't a windfall, Gregory, it's a grave. My father is dead. And instead of mourning, you and your mother are strategizing." He didn't respond, just picked up his fork, as if ending the argument with the clink of silver on ceramic. Over the next few days, Evelyn began showing up, uninvited, unannounced. Once she brought a manila folder filled with property listings, laying them out on my coffee table like she was pitching a business deal. Another time, she came with a designer in tow, walking through my home with narrowed eyes and muttered notes. Gregory said nothing. Worse, he encouraged it. She's just excited, he shrugged. Don't be dramatic. Oh, dramatic. I tasted the word like poison. I was watching my marriage rot from the inside, and all anyone wanted to talk about was drapes and kitchen tiles. That was the moment I decided to take the first real step. I started locking the office where I kept my father's documents. I changed every password, email, banking, even the passcode on my phone. I moved part of the inheritance into a separate account under the advice of someone I trusted, Philip Anderson. Then I scheduled a private meeting. I don't know what this will become, I told him across the polished desk, but I need to be ready for whatever comes next. He studied me for a long moment, then leaned forward. Sarah, he said quietly, you need to install cameras. Now. Especially in your office. Especially if someone in that house thinks they deserve half of everything. I recoiled at the idea, but I didn't argue. And 2 days later, I didn't regret it. Because that's when I saw her. On the footage. Evelyn, in my office. Opening drawers, flipping through files, reading folder labels like a scavenger hunting gold, and her hand? It was inches away from the locked drawer where my father's signed trust documents were kept. I paused the footage, my fingers frozen. Then I backed it up, twice. And I whispered to myself, "You're not going to win. Not this time." The first time he said I was selfish, I realized the man I married had died long before my father did. I didn't confront Evelyn right away. Not because I was afraid, but because I was calculating. There's a difference between reacting and responding, and I had learned the hard way that a well-timed silence was often more effective than a rushed accusation. Until I watched the footage 3 more times. Each pass confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't looking for a pen. She wasn't lost. She was searching. Methodically. Intentionally. I forwarded a backup copy to Philip Anderson and filed the original on a password-protected external drive. Then I locked the drawer she'd nearly opened and placed a small strip of clear tape on its edge, barely visible, but enough to tell me if someone tried again. By the time Evelyn showed up at my doorstep the following afternoon, I was ready. She didn't ring the bell, just opened the door like she lived there, her voice floating in like cheap perfume. "Sarah? I brought some scones. Fresh from that bakery in Capitol Hill you love." I met her in the kitchen. She set the box down like a peace offering, her eyes scanning the room as if taking inventory. "Your office light was on this morning," she said casually, pouring herself coffee without asking. "Gregory mentioned you've been up late a lot." I gave a neutral smile. "Just organizing some things." "Legal matters." She leaned on the counter, sipping slowly. "You know, it's not good to drown in paperwork when you're grieving. Sometimes you just have to release. Let others help." My response was flat. "I'm not drowning. I'm navigating." Her smile tightened. "Of course. I didn't mention the video. Not yet. Instead, I let her talk. She rambled on about market trends, luxury condos in Bellevue, the advantages of early investment, all cloaked in the language of concern, all framed as support. Then she pulled out a folded brochure from her purse. "I thought this might interest you. A development project I've been eyeing. They're offering pre-market rates to family members of investors." Family. The word hung there like a threat. I took the brochure, glanced at it, and said nothing. Later that night, Gregory came home smelling like bourbon and expensive failure. He dropped his keys in the dish by the door and wandered into the living room where I was rereading the trust agreement for the 3rd time. He sat across from me, eyes glazed. "You still mad about the Aspen idea? I thought it was a nice gesture." I didn't look up. "This isn't about Aspen." "Well, it's not about Evelyn either," he snapped. "She's trying, you just won't let her in." I closed the folder. She walked into my office without permission. Again. She was just looking for a pen. "Sarah, don't insult my intelligence." His jaw clenched. You're acting like you're the only one who lost someone. No, I said evenly. I'm acting like someone who lost the only person in her life who didn't see her as a financial opportunity. He stood abruptly. You've changed. Yes, I agreed. And I like the version I'm becoming. He stared at me, then turned and walked out of the room. That night, I called Deanna Taylor. She was my father's former financial advisor, a woman who knew more about asset protection than most estate lawyers. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I told her who I was and why I was calling, she responded with a sharp inhale and a quiet, "Come in tomorrow morning. Bring everything." The following day, I arrived at her high-rise office near South Lake Union. The receptionist knew my name. Diana met me in a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a clean, sharp bun. She didn't waste time on condolences. Show me the paper trail. I handed over the folder. She reviewed it methodically, eyes flicking through each clause. Then she looked up. Your father was smart, she said. Smarter than most. He structured this so you'd have options. But you need to move now. Set up a trust, segregated from marital access. I can help you, but you'll need a clean firewall. A firewall, I echoed. Financial, legal, emotional. She added with a knowing smile. I left her office with a list of tasks and a cold clarity running through my veins. That evening, as I opened my laptop to begin re-outering accounts, I noticed something odd. A pop-up in the corner of the screen, recent login attempt 3:14 AME. My stomach tightened. I hadn't touched my computer since midnight, and the webcam light had turned on, according to the system log. I stared at the screen, my breath caught. Someone had tried to get in, and the worst part wasn't that they'd failed, it was that they believed they had the right to try. I didn't confront Gregory right away. Instead, I changed every password I had. Banking, email, cloud storage, even my grocery app. Then I disabled facial recognition and set up two-factor authentication across every device. It felt absurd, a bit paranoid, but the light on that webcam hadn't turned on by accident. Someone was testing the boundaries. I wasn't going to wait for them to cross all the way through. The next morning, I met Philip Anderson in a quiet corner of his office overlooking Pike Place Market. Rain streaked the windows behind him, the gray light flattening the cityscape into a washed-out painting. I'm not accusing anyone yet, I said, sliding the laptop logs across the table, but someone tried to access my computer at 3:14 a.m. The webcam was activated. Philip reviewed the file with a furrowed brow, then nodded. You're wise to come in now. We need to get ahead of this. He opened a drawer and pulled out a sleek voice recorder the size of a lipstick tube. Start documenting everything. Audio, written logs, video if possible, especially conversations with Gregory and Evelyn. If this goes to court, this is your leverage. I took the device, turned it over in my palm. You think it's going to get that ugly? Philip looked at me, expression unreadable. Sarah, you're sitting on an inheritance worth $35 million. People have murdered for less. It wasn't melodrama. It was math. I left his office feeling both empowered and chilled. Outside, the city was bustling. Tourists taking selfies with flying fish, baristas calling out orders, taxis honking at crosswalks. Life carried on, oblivious to the quiet war simmering inside my home. That evening, Gregory returned with a bouquet of peonies, my favorite flowers, though he hadn't remembered that in years. He cooked dinner, he poured wine, he asked about my day, and I smiled. I played along, because this wasn't reconciliation. It was reconnaissance. When he went upstairs to shower, I checked the folder Evelyn had left on the coffee table. Inside, along with investment brochures, was a typed letter with her name at the bottom, Sarah It. It would be a shame to see all of this fall into the wrong hands. Let's be smart. Let's be a family. Evelyn and I folded the letter and slid it into my purse. More documentation. Later that night, I ran a security scan on my devices. One file stood out. Meeting, _record, _827. I didn't remember saving it. I opened the file cautiously, headphones in. It was audio. Crackly at first, then clear, Evelyn's voice. "She's not going to give it up willingly. You need to push harder," Gregory responded. "She's already suspicious. If we go too fast, she'll lawyer up. Then do it quietly. Wear her down. Make her think she's being unreasonable." My hands turned cold. The date of the file matched the night after my father's funeral. They had been planning this from the very beginning. I backed up the recording and uploaded it to 2 separate encrypted drives. Then I added a copy to a password-protected cloud folder labeled Winter. It was time to stop reacting. It was time to build my firewall. The next day, I met with Diana Taylor again. This time, I came prepared. Copies of documents, a list of accounts, even a rough sketch of the trust I wanted to build. We sat in her private office overlooking the waterfront. She looked through everything, nodding as she reviewed line by line. "We can structure this so that any funds moved into the trust are shielded from marital access," she said. "Gregory would need a court order just to request a review. And given the terms of your father's original agreement, it would be nearly impossible to overturn." I exhaled slowly. Let's do it. By the time I returned home that night, the house felt colder than usual, quieter, like it was holding its breath. Gregory was in the kitchen, nursing a drink. "Long day?" he asked. "Productive?" I replied. "I met with Diana again." He looked up. "Financial Diana?" "Yes." I needed some advice. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You didn't think to talk to me first." "I did," I said calmly, "and then I remembered who you talked to first." He didn't respond. I walked past him up the stairs and into my locked office. I backed up all the day's files. I double-checked the trust paperwork. Then I clicked into the camera feed and froze. The screen showed the entry hallway, and there, just 2 hours earlier, was Evelyn. Entering the house. Alone. Gregory wasn't home. I wasn't home. But Evelyn? She had let herself in. And in her hand, caught by the edge of the camera frame, was a small silver key. The key to the drawer she had never been told existed. The house no longer felt like mine. Every room held a shadow. Every smile from them felt like a lie. I replayed the camera footage 3 times before I let myself believe it. There she was, Evelyn in a charcoal coat, hair pinned immaculately, stepping into my house like she owned the deed. She didn't hesitate, didn't look around. She moved through the hallway with purpose, pausing only briefly to glance toward the stairs. And then the frame caught it, her hand brushing along the edge of the console table, slipping something small into her coat pocket. I froze the footage, zoomed in. A key. My key. The key to the locked drawer in my office. The drawer I had never told her about. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the paused screen. The silence in the room buzzed louder than any alarm. I felt it in my teeth, in my spine, an electricity of betrayal that no longer surprised me, only confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an invasion. That night I didn't sleep. I printed out screenshots, made copies, uploaded backups. My backup had backups. At 2 a.m. I emailed the files to Diana with the subject line, "Contingency, backass breach." By morning, the house was flooded with golden light, pretending everything was fine. Gregory noticed the stiffness in my shoulders, but said nothing. He was back to his usual script. Coffee, sports news, silence. I watched him like a stranger you might suspect of pickpocketing you in a crowd, too familiar to be innocent. I waited until Evelyn appeared again, as I knew she would. She arrived mid-morning, letting herself in with Gregory's spare key. Convenient. Predictable. I waited until she was settled in the kitchen, sipping coffee from the mug I always used, barefoot like it was her house. I walked in without a word. "Morning," she said, feigning surprise. "I didn't think you'd be home." "I live here," I replied, voice flat. "Still?" She chuckled, unbothered. "You're tense. You should relax. I know you've been through a lot. We all have." "Is that why you let yourself into my office last week?" Her hand paused over her mug. Excuse me? You were looking through my drawers. You nearly opened one that was locked. She tilted her head, all wide-eyed innocence. Oh, Sarah, I was just looking for a pen. Gregory said you keep extras in there. I smiled, cold, knowing. You didn't find any pens in the locked drawer, did you? She blinked, but the mask cracked for just a moment, just long enough for me to see what was underneath. Contempt. I'm sure you'll let Gregory know I was here, she said, standing up slowly. Of course, I said, and the camera already did, too. She stiffened. That was the first time I saw her truly surprised. You installed cameras in your own home, she said, voice dripping with judgment. I stepped closer, my tone surgical. When my father was alive, I never needed locks or surveillance. But then again, he never treated my life like a business opportunity. She moved toward the hallway, heels clicking, but before she left, she turned to me with a smirk. You think you're so clever, but women like you crack, sooner or later. I didn't answer. I watched her leave. Then I locked the door behind her and stood there, hand still on the bolt as my heart finally began to slow. That afternoon, I met Philip in his office again. I showed him the footage, the printed images, the email Evelyn had left, the key. He nodded grimly. This is enough. Combined with the financial records Diana pulled on her failed business ventures, the courts will view this as attempted coercion at minimum, possibly constructive fraud. And Gregory? I asked. Philip sighed. Unless he directly participated, we'd need more than implication, something that ties him to action. Not just intention. I leaned back, exhaling. Then I guess I'll have to catch him in the act. Philip's lips twitched into the faintest smile. Just be careful. You're not just playing defense anymore. He was right. I wasn't reacting. I was building a case, a narrative, a foundation no one could rip apart with charm or entitlement. And that night, as I sat at my desk, staring at the locked drawer Evelyn had failed to open, I realized something else. It wasn't just about what they wanted from me anymore. It was about who they thought I was. And if they still thought I was the quiet daughter, the grieving widow-to-be, they hadn't checked the second drawer, the one that was already empty, because everything inside was now in the hands of someone far beyond their reach. Gregory noticed the shift before I ever said a word. Maybe it was in the way I locked my office now, or the way I kept my laptop in my handbag instead of on the desk. Maybe it was the way I started watching him, not like a wife watching her husband, but like a strategist measuring risk. Whatever it was, he picked up on it. One evening, he stood in the doorway of my office, his silhouette backlit by the hallway lamp. He didn't ask to come in, just leaned there, arms folded, eyes wary. Are we really going to keep playing this game, he asked. I didn't look up from my screen. What game is that, exactly? He stepped forward, his voice lowered. This Cold War, you locking doors, keeping secrets, acting like I'm some kind of criminal. I clicked save, closed the document I was working on, asset protection terms for the new trust. Funny, I said, standing slowly, that you think protecting myself is the same as accusing you of something. He looked away for a second. Just long enough for guilt to flicker across his face. You've changed, he said, almost bitter. I've evolved, he laughed dryly. You used to talk to me. Trust me, you used to earn it. There it was again, that pause, the twitch in his jaw, the flicker behind his eyes like he wanted to argue but knew better. He turned, walked away without another word. The door clicked softly behind him. I pressed the recorder in my pocket. The tiny device had captured every word. I labeled the file Gregory_confrontation1mav and moved it to the secure folder I'd created the night after discovering the webcam breach. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fans spinning slowly overhead, not out of fear, but out of clarity. This was no longer about mourning my father or protecting his money. This was about the fact that the people closest to me had reduced my loss to a transaction, a playbook, a negotiation, and I had to outmaneuver them. The next morning, Diana called. "I've reviewed the transfer schedule. If we move the next portion into the blind trust by Friday, we'll stay ahead of any discovery risk." I nodded, phone pressed to my ear as I stared out the kitchen window. "Do it." "Also," she added, "we found something else. Evelyn took out a private line of credit 2 weeks before your father died, backed against a speculative investment account." "She expected access," I murmured. "She did more than that. She wagered it." I thanked her and hung up. My mind spun. Evelyn wasn't just greedy, she was desperate. That afternoon, I received an email. At first, I didn't recognize the address. we.c.holloway@aol.com. Subject line, "We need to talk. Your father didn't tell you everything." I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. "Sarah, I worked with your father for 12 years. There are documents, things he never filed through Anderson and Miles. Some of them relate to Evelyn, others to Gregory. I don't trust email. If you want the truth, meet me. Friday, 4 p.m., the old conservatory building on Pine Street. Come alone. W.C. Holloway." My stomach tightened. The name tickled something in the back of my memory. A brief mention in one of my father's letters? Or maybe from a conversation years ago about someone he let go after a disagreement in ethics? I tried searching the name online, nothing came up. Of course it didn't. Men like Holloway don't leave digital footprints. They leave legacies buried in filing cabinets and safe deposit boxes. I printed the email, filed it under a new folder, Holloway Pending. By midnight, I had a plan. Diana would prepare a legal retainer to bring Holloway in as a legacy consultant in case I needed to formalize anything. I'd forward the footage of Evelyn with the key to Philip, have him log it as part of the record, and I'd recheck the insurance policies on every property I owned. Because I had the feeling things were about to accelerate, and I didn't want anyone catching up. At 3:17 a.m., I received another email from Holloway. No subject. Just one sentence in the body. "You're not the only one Evelyn tried to erase." When I stopped doubting myself, I started seeing everyone else clearly. Trust is a funny thing. When it breaks, it doesn't shatter, it corrodes, quietly, slowly. It eats away at everything familiar until even a kind smile feels like a trap. By the time I received the second email from W.C. Holloway, I knew exactly what to do. I didn't reply. I printed it instead, slid it into the folder labeled Holloway Pending, and packed that folder into a locked leather case I kept hidden beneath the false floor of my closet. I also began cross-referencing every mention of Holloway in my father's archived documents. There weren't many, but the few that remained were telling. Handwritten notes about strategic restructuring, a ledger entry showing a severance payout dated 7 years ago, and one sentence scribbled in the margins of a legal memo: "If Evelyn ever pushes too far, he'll know what to do." I didn't know if that was a threat or a contingency plan, but I was going to find out. That morning I met with Diana again. Her office on the 21st floor overlooked the ferry docks, the view too pristine to match the tension in my chest. "He emailed me again," I told her. "No subject, just, 'You're not the only one Evelyn tried to erase.'" Diana leaned back, fingers steepled under her chin. "Did your father ever mention children outside of your family? A second beneficiary? Anything?" "No," I said, too quickly. "Then, at least, not to me." She nodded. "Keep it quiet. Don't reply. And if you go to this meeting, don't go alone." "I won't," I lied. We moved on to the next phase of my financial firewall. Diana had already transferred the second tranche of assets into the blind trust, and we were preparing to freeze any joint accounts under suspicion of misuse. Gregory still didn't know. He'd stopped asking questions. I think he knew the answers would expose more than he was ready to face. By afternoon, I returned home to an eerily quiet house. No Evelyn, no Gregory, just silence, and the weight of a truth waiting to be peeled back. I sat at my desk and began reviewing the footage again, not just from my office, but from the hallway, the kitchen, even the front porch. That's when I saw something new. 3 nights ago, Gregory, standing outside, talking on the phone. The camera didn't pick up audio, but his body language said enough. Pacing, gesturing, stopping to stare through the walls, and then he pulled something from his pocket, a small flash drive. He held it for a beat before tucking it into the inner pocket of his blazer. I hit pause. Rewound, there it was again. It wasn't one of mine. I opened a new note on my computer. Find out what's on Gregory's flash drive. The next day, I followed through with the most decisive step yet, hiring a private investigator. Philip had referred me to a woman named Erin Lockhart, a former federal fraud analyst turned freelance investigator. She looked more like a yoga instructor than a surveillance expert. Blonde, serene, unreadable. "I'm not asking you to trail them," I said. "Not yet. I need to know what Evelyn is hiding, and whether Gregory's been coached to hide it for her." Erin gave a simple nod. "Give me 72 hours. And don't warn them, let them be themselves." I had to admire that logic. Let people relax and they'll expose everything. That night, Gregory cooked dinner again. Pan-seared halibut, wild rice, a side of perfectly roasted asparagus. He poured 2 glasses of Cabernet and smiled as he sat down. "You seem calmer," he said, watching me closely. "Maybe I'm just tired of being angry." He smiled wider. "That's a start." I played along, let him talk, let him believe the worst was over. But even as I lifted the wine to my lips, my mind was somewhere else, on Holloway, on the drawer Evelyn nearly opened, on the possibility that there was more to my father's silence than just illness and pride. At exactly 9:44 p.m., my phone vibrated. A new message from Erin Lockhart. "You'll want to see this. Evelyn wasn't the first." Beneath it was a single attachment, a scanned letter, signed Martha Caldwell, my mother. The letter was written in my mother's unmistakable cursive. Clean, precise, slightly slanted to the right. It was dated December 11th, 1997, just 3 weeks before her fatal car crash. I had to read it 3 times before the meaning sank in. "Dearest Martha, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I don't trust Evelyn. There are movements in the estate that no one is supposed to notice, not even you, but we both know why that's impossible. If anything happens to me, promise me this. Protect the child, the one whose birth certificate I asked you to hold. Don't give it to Evelyn. Don't give it to anyone except the girl when she asks, and she will ask. Love always, Eleanor." Eleanor, my grandmother. But the letter wasn't addressed to Evelyn. It was to Martha Caldwell, my mother, which meant there was another birth certificate. One I had never seen. And someone, either Evelyn or Martha, had gone to great lengths to make sure I never would. I called Erin. "Where did you get this?" It was buried in an old P.O. box, registered under the name Helen Price, one of Eleanor's pseudonyms. I ran it through property records. She used that name to lease a safe deposit box in Savannah, Georgia, back in '97. Savannah! My pulse quickened. That's where my mother's last business trip was. Erin didn't speak for a moment. Then she added, "I think your mother went there to protect something or someone." That night, I sat in my father's old study, the one Evelyn had converted into a guest room years ago. I'd always avoided it, unable to bear how his presence had been stripped from the space, but now, in the drawer beneath the window seat, I found it. An envelope, taped to the underside of the wooden panel. It was dusty. Unmarked. Inside, a folded piece of paper, certificate of live birth, issued by the state of Georgia, date July 2, 1992, name Noah Taylor, mother Sarah Caldwell, father Gregory Taylor. I felt the blood drain from my face. Gregory was my father. But I was born in Vermont in 1991. I wasn't supposed to have a younger brother, unless he wasn't my brother, he was my son. My knees gave out beneath me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. couldn't speak. The silence roared in my ears, louder than any betrayal I had ever known. I dug through the envelope again. Another slip of paper fell out. A DNA report. Eleanor had ordered it herself. The sample compared subject A and subject B. A match, 99.97% probability of maternal relationship. Sarah Caldwell and Noah Taylor. I clutched the report to my chest. How? Why? Why had they told me I had miscarried? Why had Gregory told me the baby hadn't survived? And where was he now? I stayed up the rest of the night, pulling every document, every folder I could find. Somewhere, buried beneath a layer of lies, was the key. I would find it. The next morning, I called Erin. Start looking for anyone named Noah Taylor, born July 2, 1992. Use my name. My DNA. I don't care what it costs. Already ahead of you, she said. And Sarah, there's something else. I traced Evelyn's travel history through her charity filings, and she's been wiring monthly payments to a private address in upstate New York for 18 years. Under a trust named Crescent Hill. Guess who it's registered to? I didn't answer. Because I already knew. Noah. Noah was alive. And Evelyn had kept him hidden from me, on purpose, to control me, to punish me, to own me. The next morning, a package arrived at my doorstep, no return address. Inside, a photograph of a young man with dark curls and my mother's eyes, standing in front of a brick house marked Crescent Hill Boarding Academy. On the back, one line written in block letters, "He doesn't know who you are." They say some truths should never be spoken over coffee. But I wasn't here for comfort, I was here for war. It was a crisp Thursday morning in Burlington, the kind where sunlight cuts cold and precise like a blade through the haze, the kind of morning Evelyn Taylor would pretend to savor with lavender tea and smug silence. But not today. I chose the cafe carefully. Not the family brunch spot she flaunted in the society column. Not some sterile boardroom where she held court. This was neutral ground, a modest corner cafe off Pine Street. Quiet, nondescript, a place where secrets could shatter without echoing. I arrived early, sat at the farthest table from the door back to the wall. I wanted to see her face the moment she walked in. I wanted to read her the way she'd been reading and rewriting my entire life. The package with Noah's photo still burned in my coat pocket. The words on the back haunted me all night. He doesn't know who you are. I didn't know what I'd do when I saw her, but I knew I wouldn't leave without answers. Or blood. When Evelyn walked in, she looked the same as ever. Impeccable coat, eyes sharp as glass, hair like she'd stepped out of a political campaign photo. She scanned the room once, zeroed in on me, and smiled like this was all a misunderstanding. She sat without being invited. "I must admit," she said, laying her gloves down neatly, "I expected the courthouse, or the boardroom, not this charming little war bunker. I wanted you to feel at home," I said coldly, "among the ghosts you left behind." She raised an eyebrow. "Cryptic. That's new." I pulled the photo from my coat and slid it across the table. Her face didn't change. That was what terrified me most. "Noah," I said. "He's alive. You lied." Her fingers hovered over the photo but didn't touch it. "You don't understand the full picture." "Then paint it," she sighed, as if I'd forced her to break some unspoken vow of elegance. "Your mother," she said, "made choices. Dangerous ones. And I cleaned up after her, as always." "Is that what you call hiding my son from me? Cleaning up?" "I protected him. From your father. From your weakness. From yourself." I nearly upended the coffee in my hand. "You stole him!" She leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. "He would have been destroyed in that house, just like you were." The air between us turned to glass. "You don't get to use my trauma as your justification," I whispered. Evelyn's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. She reached into her handbag and produced a single folded paper. "Go ahead," she said. Read it. I unfolded it slowly. It was a notarized statement dated July 3, 1892. It was signed by a doctor at St. Clair's Maternity Clinic in Georgia. Mental instability observed post-delivery. Patient advised temporary guardianship for infant safety. I stared at it, unblinking. You forged this. I didn't need to, she replied. Your mother filed it herself. Eleanor signed the witness form. I felt the room tilt. No, this wasn't true. This wasn't my mother. You're lying. Evelyn reached for her coffee, sipped it like we were discussing weekend plans. Believe what you want, but I raised him with care. Education, boundaries, stability. Things you couldn't have given him at 19 with your wrists slit and your mind collapsing. Her words hit like ice water, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I'm going to him, I said. Evelyn didn't flinch. You'll ruin him, she said softly. You'll unravel everything he believes about his life, about himself, about his mother. I leaned forward, voice steel. He deserves to know. Her smile cracked. So, she said, this is the kind of mother you choose to be? I stood, ready to walk away, but she added one more sentence, quiet enough to freeze me in place. You think he's the only one you lost, she said. You should have read the second page in that envelope. My fingers trembled as I reached into the envelope again, unfolding the second sheet Evelyn had alluded to. It was thinner than the first, nearly translucent, like paper meant to carry truths too fragile to speak aloud. The header read, Consent for Kinship DNA Testing, March 2005. 2 names leapt off the page, Sarah Taylor and Gregory Taylor. I blinked, unable to comprehend. This wasn't about Noah, this was about me. Why would Gregory and I— My voice caught, too confused to be angry. Evelyn leaned back, her expression unreadable for once. Because Eleanor asked for it, she had suspicions. I swallowed hard. What suspicions? She stared into her coffee as if it held the answer. That you weren't his daughter. The words hit like a fault line, cracking beneath my feet. She thought he wasn't your father? I asked. No, Evelyn said, softly. She knew. The blood drained from my face. Then who is? She took a long breath, like she'd rehearsed this conversation in the mirror 1,000 times. His name was Daniel Hartman. He was Eleanor's first love, a photographer from Savannah. Gregory knew, of course. He married Eleanor anyway. For the family name, the money, you were always a reminder. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping across the tile. So, everything was a lie? No, Evelyn said, rising too. Some lies are just truths no one had the courage to claim. I didn't trust myself to speak. The walls of the cafe felt too narrow, the air too sharp. Outside, snow had begun to fall. I pushed open the door and stepped into it like walking into another version of my life. Behind me, Evelyn called out, He's still alive, whispered, I stopped in my tracks. Who? I whispered without turning. Daniel, your real father. He sent you a letter once. Eleanor burned it. I turned to face her, voice shaking. Where is he? She smiled faintly, lips pressed thin. That's the question, Sarah. But are you ready for the answer? Some truths don't break you. They release you. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running. I was choosing to walk away. The air was crisp, the kind that held the final breath of winter before spring dared to take its place. I stood at the edge of the Taylor estate driveway, suitcase in hand, watching the morning light touch the frost-laced hedges that had once hemmed in a girl desperate for approval. I wasn't that girl anymore. Inside, behind the tall windows framed in stone, the house stirred. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it had frozen in place, just like its people, trapped in a choreography of denial and control. Judith's silence, Marcus's cowardice, Tiffany's venom, they had all played their parts, and I had played mine. Until now. I had left the envelope on the mahogany dining table, the one containing the DNA report, the forged will Gregory had hoped no one would uncover, and the photograph Evelyn had handed me of a man standing on a savannah beach, camera in hand. Daniel Hartman? My father. My real father. The morning after the confrontation at the cafe, I had made one final visit to Eleanor's old storage unit. There, behind stacks of forgotten heirlooms and cracked leather suitcases, I found the original will. Dated, signed, and witnessed. A different future was spelled out in that brittle document. A future meant for me. Eleanor hadn't left me empty. She had left me everything. Gregory had just tried to erase it. I took a step back from the house, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. In fact, it felt oddly peaceful, like pulling a final stitch from a wound that had long since scarred over. In my pocket, my phone buzzed, a message from Zoe. "You sure about this?" I typed back. For once, yes. The sound of the front door creaking open behind me didn't make me turn. I knew who it was before I heard her voice. "Sarah? Don't go." Tiffany, not a plea, more like a command she hadn't realized had lost its weight. I didn't answer. I never meant to. She started, but even she knew how empty that sounded. I turned halfway, just enough for her to see my face, my eyes. "You meant every word, Tiffany, and I remember all of them." She flinched, just slightly. "Where will you even go?" I smiled softly. "Somewhere that doesn't need a name. Somewhere I get to start with the truth." Then I walked. One step, then another. The cold biting, the sky widening. Behind me the Taylor mansion grew smaller. Ahead the road bent gently toward a sun I hadn't realized was rising. The bus station in Montpelier wasn't much. Just a long bench, a vending machine that spat out warm soda, and an old woman humming to herself as she counted nickels. I sat near the window, my suitcase beside me, the envelope of documents now folded neatly inside a manila folder tucked under my coat. I had bought a one-way ticket to Boston, no destination in mind beyond that, only a promise to myself that wherever I went, I would no longer be someone's secret, someone's scapegoat, someone's mistake. Zoe was the only one who knew. She offered to drive me, begged me to let her come along, but I declined. Some exits had to be walked alone. Still, she slipped something into my hand before she left, a worn leather notebook with my name embossed on the front. "Write it down," she'd said. "All of it. Don't let them own your story." I opened it now, the pen in my fingers trembling a little less than I expected. "I am Sarah Taylor, and this is the last time I will answer to a name." I stopped writing. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a man in a long coat step into the terminal. He was tall, maybe mid-60s, with hair the same shade of silver as Eleanor's. He moved like someone not used to waiting. I knew that walk. He glanced around once, then again, and then his eyes found mine. He didn't smile. He just nodded. Slowly, like he already knew everything I'd just survived. "Daniel Hartman." He approached, cautiously, leaving distance between us as though not to spook a stray. "You look like her," he said quietly. "Eleanor." My breath hitched. "You got her fired too, I hear," he added, placing a small photo frame on the seat beside me. It was the same beach picture, but this one had a note scrawled on the back in my mother's handwriting. "For Sarah. Truth will always find its way home." "I didn't know," he whispered. "Not until after she died. She made sure of that." I studied his face, the lines time had carved, the regret too deep to be rehearsed. "What now?" I asked, not accusing, just weary. "That depends," he said. "Would you let me tell you about her, about me?" I hesitated. I didn't owe him anything, but maybe I owed myself the full story. Before I could respond, my phone lit up. Unknown number, voicemail, one new message. I clicked play. A woman's voice crackled through the speaker, tired, broken, and desperate. "Sarah, it's Tiffany. You need to come back. It's It's Mom, she's not who we thought. There's something else, something we didn't see, and someone's already trying to bury it. I stared at the phone. Daniel leaned forward. What is it? I didn't look at him. My heart was already turning back toward a place I thought I had escaped, because the story wasn't over, and maybe, just maybe, the real secret hadn't even been uncovered yet. Thanks so much for watching Family and Heart Stories. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more heartfelt dramas every week.